So the first thing I want to say is Happy New Year. You come back, which is great. Many of you got the message. I know we said that we weren't going to be starting immediately in the new year, but we got all contracts in place and we are here. Now, I'm saying we are here, but I know you guys are thinking, where's Lauren? Okay, so first of all, I have to say Lauren's a trooper. She is behind the scenes, she's in the chat. She has the flu and she is still here. So first, send your love to Lauren in the chat. You know, she is always here. She sent me a message early this morning. I'm really sick. I'm not going to show up in face, but I'm going to be here. So she's here in the background. Now, as for the SBDC announcement that she does so beautifully, and how you guys know they've been around for a long time, how Sadie does it, I don't have it. Okay, so we're just going to start off the bat with me saying Happy New Year to everybody. Welcome to Small Biz Talk. Your host, Lori Williams, offered by the SBDC, which gives advice, shows like this, webinars, helps any small businesses with most questions that you can ask, and has a slew of fantastic advisors there to assist you in starting, growing, establishing, maintaining your business. And if you want to reach an advisor, Lauren will put her email in the chat. So guys, that was my best attempt. You guys that are frequent flyers, I didn't do as well as Lauren did and does, but here I am, I got it. Okay, so with that, guys, let's get started. I am going to go ahead and share my screen and we should be good to go. It seems so weird without Lauren but here. I got to tell you, I feel like I'm a little lost. So if you guys have any comments in the chat like, Lori, we don't see you or anything, let me know, okay? So first of all, once again, welcome to Small Biz Talk and Happy New Year. So guys, you know, I always start out with a myth buster, right? Well, I thought about it and I said, you know what? I'm going to do something different this year. I'm going to change my myth busters to be named words of wisdom. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to go through the myth busters. I'm still going to be giving that information as well. But I was thinking and I said, you know, 2024, I got this feeling that what we really need is have words of wisdom through 2024. How are we going to be? What are we going to think? How are we going to respond in our personal life as well as our businesses to create a fabulous 2024 that's filled with all our dreams, desires, etc.? So this is where I am going to start. And it's funny because I wasn't intending on this, but I got this memory. I would say it's a vision, but it was a memory. And it just came into my mind this morning. And I said, okay, that's a sign. That's where we're going to start. Noise does not equal wisdom. Okay, guys, this is a funny story. It goes back to my late 20s when I had just started in business. I was promoted to this position. I was doing well within a company, and there was a couple people in this company, and I'm young, I'm naive. I don't understand the world completely yet, especially because many of you know I came from a country bumpkin background, right? And here I am in the big city. And a couple people, especially this one, he would walk into the owner of the company and make all these statements of all these things he was going to do in sales and he was going to do this. And he was very loud and boisterous about his behaviors and everything he succeeded at. And I noticed that the owner would just like glam onto him thinking that he was the world, but none of his statements of what he was going to do actually happened, but she never noticed they didn't happen. And I remember very young thinking, but wait a minute, I come from the country. The words you speak are supposed to be what actually happens, or you come back and say differently, right? Well, I soon learned that's not the way it is in business. It was a rude awakening, right? And every time he would come into my office, it would be very frustrating. So what I did is I wrote above my door, noise does not equal wisdom. And every time he came in, I would just look at noise does not equal wisdom. And it was kind of my understanding in the world of what I'm going to say. When you're a small business, you need to find lots of information, lots of details. When you're looking at the information, question, what is the source of the information? What is the credentials of the presenter? Like I've said to you, go directly to the government sites for information. As I was reflecting back on the previous year, and the things that I noticed the most, as I've expressed on the show numerous times, is people not realizing you have to dissolve an LLC, not realizing you have to file a sales tax report with zero if you haven't stopped your sales certificate. All of these things where people said, well, I went on to a YouTube and I got this advice and I did this accounting or I filed this document, not really understanding what it means. And so in this year, let's make a goal. We are going to do your research. You're going to do the research, check multiple sources, and ask questions before you make these decisions, especially in relationship to legal decisions for your business, tax decisions for your business, financial accounting decisions for your business. Don't let others decide how you should think. So that's my first words of wisdom, which I'm going to build upon, but I felt like that gives us a foundation. Remember, I started saying at the end of last year, we're taking our power back. We're creating a life we desire. And that means not getting nasty letters from the government because you did not do something correctly. Okay, guys, I'm going to start with my financial literacy series in January. Remember, session 2 and session 3 goes through managerial accounting and talks all about using the numbers to make crucial decisions within your company, not just doing your accounting, sticking it in a drawer and forgetting about it, but actually using the numbers to advise and give you the wisdom of the decisions you need to make within your company. I am going to bring back the legal structures and tax advantages possibly in February, so look for that. Plus, I got a couple new webinars on the horizon. Next week, we got Emma Green, our frequent flyer that we all love. She's going to come on and she's going to talk about best entrepreneurial traits for success. Then David Horowitz, I've asked him to come back on. He was the certified financial planner, and we started talking about retirement plans for small businesses. This show was a hit. We didn't get through everything we wanted to. So I thought with it being early in the year, I'm having some people come on, talk about things we can do to plan efficiently for the year, for tax season. I'm probably going to also have the HR specialist, Zamara, come back on to talk a little bit about some of the new HR rules. I'm trying to get you guys all set up in January and February so we can have a successful year. Speaking of which, we're going to start out today with a special guest that we have on the show. Michael Hiller is a millennial and entrepreneur raised right here, Woodland Hills, California. Michael comes from a family of entrepreneurs and CPAs. During his time working for the family business, Michael came to the realization that many millennial small business owners were not being provided the dedicated time and resources to understand their business and accounting needs. You know, that's something true to my heart. He used this realization and his determination to find a solution where he could approach small business owners and provide them with the guidance they were looking for. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lori. Appreciate being on. Good
Happy
morning,
New Year.
everyone.
Happy
Happy
New
New
Year to
Year.
you. What a beautiful way to start the year talking about tax, right?
Absolutely.
But before we begin, I want to find out more about your family business, you taking the helm of it. They've been around for a long time. Give us your entrepreneurial background, your family business background. Tell us about it.
Oh yeah. As a family, we've been doing Hiller and Hiller CPA practice for 35 plus years. And just like all the age going, my parents are very much old on the older generation side. And when I was working, with the different age groups, from the clients' kids, especially, I found that there was just a disconnect, and it wasn't just with, our practice, it was every practice of the tax firms, because the generation just was changing, the needs were changing, technologies, when my parents were starting, they were, handwriting tax returns to utilizing these supercomputers where one person at a time would be going up to the computer and punching in one at a time. And, now we're, at such a different level now with technology and taxes. And, we need a different stepping up. And that's what I did. I stepped up and, I said, we have to be the change in this world. We there is such a disconnect, with from education and communication, and that's what
Gotcha.
my journey got me here, and we'll be talking more about our practice.
Absolutely. Another memory came to my mind. I started my first company when I was 25, and I went and bought one of those old-fashioned ledgers. They had those books, and you would put the little checks on, and you'd write the checks, and it made
Yeah.
a duplicate. And that's what you handed to your tax preparer at the end of the year. So I understand your parents. Now, before we go into some of the details, I also want to touch on one of the things that we were talking before the show. I would call you an educator. You are involved. You probably are, if not the only tax preparer that I heard teaching as much or many different types of people as you. Give us kind of a rundown of your positions as an educator.
Uh, you know, uh, First thing, being an educator, there is no stupid questions, and that's the one thing, you have to be open-minded no matter how many times you repeat. Because I do educate. I have taught. I used to be a former board member of the Boys and Girls Club, and I've also done university teachings of tax. And from middle school to college level, and even professionals today, there's just no education on not just the tax, but just the business concepts. And there's that educating part that comes with even my clients. And that's where we want to teach them about qualified expenses, and what the quality expense, or which ones they're think they're trying to do. um, I've come across many expenses when I go through, especially clients' QuickBooks, that are just no nos, we call them, trying to sneak them in, trying to get as, lower their balances. But, it's about the business, and that's what, we're here to focus on. And not only are we doing taxes, the service part, but we're also adding the education part, because we want, small business to do well. And it can do well with the right resources.
So what I really love about what we're talking about and what I want to expand upon is this educational component. We were talking before we started, I have a lot of conversations with small companies, and one of the complaints that they have about their relationship with their tax preparer is, I'm going to call it communication. But and this is like, you may have a reason why this is, may not, but more to delve deeper in it. I get told this a lot by clients. I can't ask my tax preparer questions. They give me short answers. Some people say they make me feel dumb. We know nobody can do that, but that's the emotion they're having, right?
Of course.
And that they just won't answer my questions. So I stopped asking. And that breaks my heart when they stop asking, because I know, first of all, it's not leading to accuracy, right? But it's taking away their power of understanding something that they're physically responsible for signing. Can you just comment in whatever area you'd like on what I just said, Michael?
It is a communication error, but as we said prior, communication and education, those are the two weaknesses, that have come to today's society. And it's as a whole, that's why you need, the general public does need to find, someone they trust. And unfortunately, with the field declining now, as we're not seeing new accountants coming from college, it's very hard to find, good people, good tax preparers. And again, the education part is a very significant factor, plus mentoring. It's very difficult now. As I mentioned, my parents prior, they're on the retirement side. So it's very difficult to find, in such a small quantity of good quality accountants that are going to be patient, without nickel and diming. And that's where the rarity comes, from this. And by finding, that, going through asking friends and family for referrals, reviewing reviews and stuff, it's very critical to find, that tax person. And those tax people that you find are not taking everybody. They're just taking, what they can handle too. Because, every tax preparer would love to take, not love, but would take, thousands of people if they can handle it. But
Right.
that's actually the problem with some firms. Some firms take on too many people. And it's like going to the doctor's office. You see your doctor, if you're lucky, for 15 minutes, and how much can you say? For the accountant, we're numbers people. We're the end of the line, so we're not always like the first to know unless they come to us and say, hey, Michael, what do you think about this? And a lot of different firms, will nickel and dime for consulting, costs. So a lot of, millennials and young, are just like, look, I'm capped on cash. I'm growing my business. I can't be going to Michael, if he's going to be nickel and diming. And that's where it becomes very, difficult, because we don't have an education system today in any way, from any level, teaching just the basics of, like qualified expenses, how the tax works, why do we do payroll? What's the point of payroll? And all these factors is nobody's ever, sat down with the client, with the younger clients, and said, this is how it works.
Yes.
And
And, I want to get into some of the weeds in a minute, but I want to back up 1 second because something I find interesting that you said, and it's a little bit of my own curiosity, but also I want to hold that point and exemplify it to the audience so they understand. This is where I'm going. I have noticed over the years, I feel when we're talking about small business tax preparers, now when I get work with the big companies and you got to have audited financials, that's a whole different world, right? Everybody kind of is educated at that point. But the
yes.
tax preparers available to the small businesses seem to be getting less and less qualified, where they're almost treating it just like I called it herding the cattle. They're putting it through, they're not asking the questions, they're not communicating like we're talking about. And the point that I wanted to make is that I'm telling people you really need to step back, take your time, do your research, and find a good tax preparer, because in the olden days, people thought just because the title was tax preparer or the title was lawyer or the title was doctor, that by default meant you could just pick them, you were good. Where I'm
Yeah.
saying, no, today that's not the case. You have to really interview and inspect a tax preparer, because to me, it seems like the industry isn't pumping out the same quality of interaction, education, communication that it used to. And I even just recently had an older gentleman that's been in tax preparation for a long time. He brought up on his own, he goes, my industry isn't doing what they should be doing. They're not asking the
Yeah.
right questions. So the first thing I want to say, and then I'm going to go into the next one. So you said that the universities are not bringing in new accountants. What do you think is the cause of these smaller time accountant firms that work with smaller businesses just not being there in that capacity more? What am I noticing and why, Michael?
The industry is taking a lot of diverse changes. The government has done a lot of new laws in the last 6 years, which has become very complicated. In the past, from the 80s to the 2000, we had, tax laws that were really stable for 30 years. Now with, even pre-COVID, from Obamacare era and on, it's been constantly the tax person has to be monitoring. We are now the police officers. If we have a foreigner come in, we have to report an F bar, and that's, I know a lot of clients will be like, well, I don't want to give this much information, and this year we have a new BOI, and for people that do not know what BOI is, many people are finding out as of the new year that we have a federal investigation unit, and because of all the things that have been going on want more information on the officers. And, these are just more reporting we're going to have to do. And that's where it becomes very complicated. This generation, there's different types of money. I've talked to a recruiter one time who called me looking for an accountant to go do a different job, right? I love LinkedIn for this. And I asked him, I said, you did 6 years of accounting. You started an associate, you went to bachelor's. What was your reason for? And what I got was being a recruiter was more money and faster. And it is less complicated, with keeping up with compliance work today. And every part of the business and industry right now has new compliances. And, it's just very hard to keep people when the stress levels are becoming just so high.
That's fascinating. I didn't even think about that aspect, but I can see what you're speaking of. When I went and tested and got my EA a couple years ago, right? So I had been around tax preparation being a CFO for years, not to the point of understanding it to that degree, but having a good understanding of a lot. When I was taking that exam, I was shocked. I At the end, I was like, wow, taxes, and it was from Obama on, I was tested. Taxes
Mm.
is more convoluted and confusing. I thought I was finally going to get the information that was going to make it a little black and white, that the reason it felt so confusing was because I didn't have the information. And I was amazed by just the things you were speaking of and all of the data you have to know. And yes, but not in this, but not in that, and then this. And
Yes.
it comes back to the point I'm wanting our audience to understand is it's not just a black and white fill out a form. It's very confusing. And I feel like this is a good launch pad to go in. And I'm going to make a statement, Michael. It's not your statement. You agree or disagree or elaborate in any way. I am not a fan of people using TurboTax once they have a company. If they just have a W-2, I'm okay with that. There's not much there. No kids, single W-2. I can see that, right? But I tell the small businesses who then try to expand on it and they go, well, I just need a Schedule C. I'm like, it's not just a Schedule C. I feel as though, and this is Lori, the minute you start any business, I don't care, it's just, sole prop, small business, you immediately get with a tax preparer because I try to explain to them there's more that goes on this form than they realize that engages in understanding intellect and the laws. Can you comment on what I just said in any direction you want to go?
Absolutely. There is a lot of competition when it comes to, especially when we're discussing pricing. With as we mentioned before about education, you have to have the understanding, like what's a, vehicle expense, home office, these expenses are, very important. And using TurboTax or Intuit's programs, Intuit is really trying, they monopolize much of our industry, from the tax software to QuickBooks to, many different programs too. So, when you have all these, opportunities, you try to shortcut, I call it, is what's happening here is, it's not as mentioned, DIY before. You can't, you don't do something yourself if it, just to have a cost savings. Being a business owner is more about putting the right people and team in place. As I focus with entrepreneurs, specifically, anyone that's just, when it comes to an employee, just a straight W-2, absolutely. There's free softwares, from, the IRS has developed a free software this year that, someone making, I believe, under 75,000 can easily use, for free, and other programs. But TurboTax and all these softwares, they're great for, people who are expecting that type of refund or very simple. But when you're utilizing a lot of different things, we can, stock sales, crypto sales, property sales. Do you have a rental property? Are you, Schedule C? All these things are so very complicated with so many more forms that you want to hire the right tax person and take that time, to, do the stuff right. The right tax preparer is going to ask a lot of questions, is going to ask you to do a lot of digging,
Mhm.
and it could be very time consuming, but it's better to do it right the first time and send it in versus someone trying to rush to get it done, or just, hey, filed, I did it, but then they missed something. And then we actually had an interesting, I took on a daughter and her mom did TurboTax and accidentally declared her as a dependent. And it now, I caught it, days before the filing. But what happened was, now the mother has to figure out how to amend it. And the daughter, who shouldn't have had this situation happen, has to now, mail in a tax return. And we're very fortunate it's the mother. Sometimes these cases, can be a little more, we don't know if Social Security could be taken
Right.
by someone else. So, we have to tread, but we luckily knew this was the mother very quickly. So, that's the relief. Otherwise, we have protocols in place, with us and the IRS for that situation to make sure, there's no duplication or, Social Security is being used, in the future.
I know, when people get into a situation where they get one of those letters or they have to amend, it gets complicated. You do not want to go down that road. You want to try to stay away from that. Before we leave the topic of the importance of having a good tax preparer, CPA, EA, one of the people in the audience asked, and it's something I wanted to chat with. Okay, so we decide I shouldn't do TurboTax. I need to interview somebody. I need to find somebody that I can speak to. How can I interview somebody? What questions can I ask? Can you give us advice on just interviewing and getting somebody on board and trusting somebody from questions to the interviewing process? And maybe even, Michael, what to listen for that isn't said? Sometimes it's what the
Absolutely.
person didn't say. So run with that a little bit because I think we're inspiring a lot of people to look for a good tax person now. So we want to give them details on how to do that. And what your firm does
Absolutely.
different from others too. Let's talk about that as well. So that's a whole lot. I'm going to let you run with it for a while.
Absolutely. So I'm going to start with how my firm does because we do have a selective process. In order for a good firm to care for its clients, you have to be very selective for which ones you can take on. And these type of things, can come from like I said, asking friends and family for referrals. That's always, find out who is around, who do you know, because that's the best referrals is word of mouth. It's not the how many times you see a bus go around and you see those logos and everything. You really want what's best for you. Every person, every client is different. Every client has different wants and different desires, and it's very important you establish that relationship because it's not just we don't I don't look for clients that are price shopping. One of the biggest things, because this is an investment. As the saying goes, you invest in your people as an employer. Same with individually. Like you're not going to find a contractor to do a sloppy job. You want to have a foundation, and that's what I am looking for is who looks for to be educated, who's going to be timely for me, who can we provide the best services. So to answer the question of what kind of questions to ask, you want to ask, how long have you been, involved, in a practice, in a business? If they don't have reviews, if they don't have a website or a LinkedIn, I'm very big on when you find someone, go on their LinkedIn. Go on LinkedIn and just search them up and and see, like, okay, get a gist of who they are. It's easily to do. No one's a wiser, especially if you haven't called the person yet. You can see, okay, like this person's has a good experience, and then go on to their website, see a little more, go to reviews, see like what are those testimonials look like. And that's just the initial part, of doing your due diligence for both sides, and once you got that in place, you call them. We do a vetting process. We're engaging this year with an intake form. by one of our partnerships, we're going to be able to, kind of not screen, but a little bit do the filtering out of, are we the best for them, or do we need to refer them out to a colleague? We're a very proactive firm, so we don't believe in letting referrals or potential clients, just hang if we don't take them on. We do have colleagues, who we partner with and work with, where we'll refer out based on, what is the client looking for. If they're looking for, it's a price deal, they're looking for an affordable or a specific price, then that's not the firm for us. So we'll refer out to a colleague who, who's been doing this for 12 years of it, and say, here, I think this can be a good fit for you. Or, if they're a W-2, but they want to kind of learn and stuff, we do have clients like lawyers, engineers, doctors that come to us, saying, Mike, like, what kind of strategies can we discuss? And, those are type of clients where we're like, okay, right now they're working at W-2, they're making good money, but they're going to be making the leap to most likely property investment.
Gotcha.
So that's where they need more strategy, and they're not going to just a lot of doctors, lawyers, you'd be surprised, do use TurboTax and do that exactly well. And and that's where poor advising comes from, because you can't Google a lot of things. You can Google some things, but it's not like, it's like going to the doctor's office, as I mentioned, and trying to Wikipedia, what is my disease? What is my
Yep.
problem here? And,
Yeah.
all you're doing is, without doing the tests, because counting and tax, it's a lot of different tests. We have to test, like if we're doing meals, like, does this last year, does this, go to 100% deduction, or is this a 50% deduction? And these are different tests. Or we're doing the independent contractor test. Are you an employee or are you not an employee? If this is not supposed to, let's get this changed, as soon as possible. So we have a lot of tests that we have to do as an accounting, and we know that the clients, they're not as organized anymore. So our job is to get them, prepared, for tax season and their business.
You hit on a big point there. And one of the things I want to say in summary of what you just shared, it almost seems like when you're interviewing for a potential tax preparer, when they are asking you a bunch of questions and trying to get you to know you, that's an indication that they're going to have a conversation with you when tax time starts. If they're just like, okay, when do you got the documents, you send it to me, etc., that's an indication that that's maybe how that relationship's going to go. With that, you were talking about the tests that you have to do and having to ask questions from your clients because they're not as knowledgeable of that. I speak a lot to the small businesses regarding that. For example, people say, well, can I take off my home office? And I always say there's a test, there's several calculations, two calculations to determine, what amount you take off, but it's not your responsibility to understand the calculations. It's your responsibility to make a note to be able to bring it up to the tax preparer in case they do not. And that's where I like to tell people, have an understanding and a little set of notes that at least you're writing down. I wonder if this is
Absolutely.
a tax deduction. I wonder if this, and make a
Yes.
little notebook that you can bring with you to your tax preparation scheduled time. And so in that, we're going to go a couple places with this, Michael. I was using an example. So say we got a tax preparer, we're choosing, what can businesses do on their end to get their numbers, their stuff prepared for the best outcome? If you had the ideal client and they had prepared properly, what would they have done? Okay, let's ask it that way.
We've had one ideal client in all these years, and I've seen ever. And we're talking, type A, where you're getting a folder that's color coded, an organized QuickBooks, that is easy to restore if you're using the desktop, or if you mostly are using QuickBooks Online today. But, being on top of your, you know, of the information is important. There's really no real, like, who's the best, who's the worst. There's none of that in the tax world. There are returns that are simple, And there are returns where we're trying to get the best option and they will be more complex. If you're going the more complex way, that's not a bad thing. It's more work. Home office is just one of the most overused expenses.
Mhm.
Yes, we are into a remote world, but and I understand especially Los Angeles rent is, California rent is very high up there. So a lot of people do want to take as much, but there's things where is it sole proprietor or are we talking a corporation? Single member LLC, S corp. These a lot of different pages here. So we really want to hit like vehicle expenses. We want to hit more of the bigger ones. Home office is like meals. Those are the most audited items
Mhm.
to date. And even vacation and travel gets hit as well, because this is where luxury happens. And when you're hitting these luxury type of expenses and trying to deduct, these are expenses, but they're not the best or most qualified expenses. They're not going to wipe out self-employment tax when it comes down to a Schedule C. We really need to look at a business and see what is the business, what type of expenses correlate with that business, how long was the 1099 time frame for, um, and really understand, because yes, there is a percentage that can be taken for home office utilities and such, but it's it's about the understanding of what are we reporting as we began, and that's the quality of the reporting and the honesty. It has to make sense, and a lot of times there individuals are taking raw data, but the tax preparer, we're taking the data and we're percentaging it. So, and on TurboTax, they're not percentaging it. They're taking the raw data, putting it in there, saying, I can get 100% of this. I can get 100% of that.
Yep.
No, you're traveling on a trip. If you did some business, I'll give you 20%. If you did some business, like
Yep.
use some Wi-Fi work and stuff like that, I'm open to take some of that, those personal expenses, but not 100% when we know going to Disneyland is the main part of the trip.
Well, and that's the other thing that the tax professional can do is give you, I'm just going to say that the common sense guidelines to try to keep you out of trouble, like the 100% versus 20%. And that's where TurboTax is not giving that advice. I'm just stating that again so people caught that. Now, it's interesting because Lamar just asked the same question in the Q&A that I was going to ask you. So we're on the same page over here, because what Lamar said is how often should you meet your tax professionals? And what I was going to say is there's different strokes for different folks, if you will. If you're a sole prop, maybe just tax time. But if you're an S corp, you may have to meet before year end to figure out the W-2 paycheck and all that. I'm just giving
Yeah,
you ideas of
Salar.
where I'm going. So let's talk about the need to meet with the tax preparer, because too many people think, oh, it's February, I'm going to find a tax preparer. We know that's a bad idea. That's the opposite end.
A lot.
But let's talk about how often should you meet? When should you have a conversation? Kind of doing the checkups to make sure your health is going well. Let's have that conversation.
So as I mentioned, I guess from a minute ago, we as a tax preparer, accountants, a lot of us are usually at the end basis. Like you said, when February comes, even though the IRS portal, I believe, opens up January 25th, we are finding a lot of last minutes, of course, try to find, and it's very, like we said, it's very difficult right now. I mean, you're looking at a very small pot of available tax preparers experience, that it's very very slim picking at this. So I would always tell people, like, if from the prior year that something didn't work, be proactive, do what you can. And I know with times, especially, it's very difficult for people to, say, Michael, you make it sound like, well, it's not easy doing research in times, when you do it when you can, you like I said, you trying to look for, friends and referrals. You try to be proactive. Once you find the tax person, my clients have an open policy with me. So it's very, they'll ask, if it's happen, they're going to go ask. And I find that to be the better suited for me, because once I work on the tax preparation and we file the client, I don't want them to make issues moving forward. So I have that, they'll shoot me an email and saying, um, some questions like, I want to purchase property, foreign property or something, should I use my corporation or something to do it? Or they want to utilize, what is the best, situation. And the thing is, like, you have to work with someone. And once you have that relationship, if you're starting as a sole proprietor DBA, when is it the right time to move up to the corporation level? You need to, it's not a tax person, it's a person with business strategy.
Yeah.
Because if you're going for just an average tax person to just get your returns done, there's plenty. There's HR Block, there's Liberty Tax. These guys just, they just burn through tax returns without really asking the back and forth questions. When you're working with a professional in the service, what you're building is not only a relationship, it's someone you go to, and you can open the door to all opportunities and questions, and that's where you want, because you want to say, not anyone knows everything. You don't want someone who knows everything. You want someone to take their time, say, hey, I'm going to do some research on this and look into it a little more, and then come back and say, hey, I have some big strategy plans for you. I think you should do this and this and this. And that'll open some ways for next door for you to do very well. We want entrepreneurs to do very well, but it's up to the entrepreneur if they want to do what we do. We call it shortcuts. Everyone knows what they need to do, but if you really wanted to make right by you and the company that you're trying to build, you're going to do the time. You're going to do what it takes. If their bill is a lot of money, you're gonna fight for more money to keep the team you want to keep. um
And what you're speaking to is one of the things that I lecture on all the time, where people are going on Google and TikTok to figure out if they should be an S corp. And they're one of my pet peeves, Michael, is that people come and go, I can save money on my taxes if an S corp. That is like missing so many other sentences and
so many.
paragraphs that it just drives me up a wall. And I always tell people, no, you really need to have somebody that understands strategy, that can look at it from a legal perspective, look at it from a tax perspective. What are the forms? Can you manage this type of system? What do you have to do? All these type of questions. So I like that. And I just wanted to pull away the word that you talked about, which was the strategy, the tax strategy, the business strategy. Those are words that have got lost with our vernaculars, and the word strategy I'm always trying to bring back. Now, one of the questions that we had, and I have varying thoughts on this, and so I'll be very interested in what you say, Michael, is a lot of times people wonder, do I have to find a tax preparer? They ask the same question about a bookkeeper that knows my industry specific. And I don't think it's that important in certain aspects, because when it comes to numbers, numbers are numbers, and they follow
Yes.
rules. They don't follow industry, they follow rules. And if somebody doesn't know their industry, you just go to the IRS, being an EA, you go into their books, you go into their publications, and you read the rule for that industry. So I think it's so important to find a tax preparer that knows their stuff and communicates and works with you, and a bookkeeper with an accounting background. I don't care whether they know my industry. I don't know if I'm right or wrong on that, but that's my view. Your comments, Michael?
Foundation is everything. Once you have the foundation, it's like an athlete. An athlete, he can go from baseball to football and many different sports, because they have the core health regimen ready. Yeah, there are going to be some functions that will be need to be more determined, more worked on and stuff. But you know whether you're an influencer making a lot of money these days, or someone who's been a TV reporter. I mean, the thing about time is, a lot of foundation things don't change. The core foundation. I'm not talking about the objects that are around. Those they're saying technology is changing, and we adapt to. But the core part of taxes, the core part of business and accounting, all these methods are reporting is still the same. We still need to get a QuickBooks going. We still need to have, reliable people is important, and you want to have, people with good experience levels and open and honesty. If you're working with a bookkeeper that's new into the industry, it's about, do you take a chance with the new bookkeeper, or do you look for someone that's a little more pricey and more experienced? Cleanup jobs are very expensive, but those are not known in the bookkeeping world, and they could be very costly effect. But when you're doing a cleanup job for tax or bookkeeping, you need to make sure it's done right. You want someone who's behind it, supervising it and saying, okay, it's going into the correct accounts. A lot of our methods are more foundational based, just really making sure like there's an organization to it. Putting, if you buy something like a computer, we want to know, hey, where's that email going? Luckily for us today, we have email. Back in the day, how many people lost their receipts? Times are changing that are more adaptable and helping us a lot now, but we also have structures that have been forgotten, and that's where we don't have enough, as a society, enough knowledge to know, like, okay, what is right, what is wrong. um you know we don't, because we're not, middle school, high school, like I said, college level, they're not, their knowledge of what is proper taxes, what is proper business expenses, it's still run on notebooks or old books.
Yeah.
And today it's very, very critical to just work with someone right.
And in that, I like the word you said, cleanup jobs. Cleanup jobs in accounting and bookkeeping are especially nasty. I've been through many of them myself, and we've had several of the guests that are involved in bookkeeping talk about cleanup jobs being a mess. And so, in that, I just feel like automation within the bookkeeping and the tax preparation is a blessing and a curse at the same time. I feel as though the clients have to be very conscious of who they're hiring for the bookkeeping, whether or not they feel comfortable doing it on their own. I see a lot of QuickBooks files a day, Michael, and I'm getting where I'm estimating about 96% of them are incorrect. I can look at a balance sheet,
Absolutely.
negative numbers where they wouldn't be. My question to you is twofold. Are you seeing the same thing where the accuracy of the data you're receiving is decreasing over the years since we've got more automation? And what should clients be aware of when interacting with automation, if I can just say it that way and let you run with it? Your thoughts on this topic that's very dear to my heart.
Automation is, like you said, it's great now where technology has gone, but the person has to understand what the tools are, and the education again comes behind it. All these factors, you can sync up the books. That's fantastic. That takes, instead of getting statements in the mail, we still rely on the statements for our files, but the transfer over of data, is great when it's quick, but you have to make sure the numbers are not duplicating, accurate, just like you would with your phone contacts when you're switching over phones. You want to make sure that nothing's being duplicated, nothing's being overstated, income is going the right way, expenses are going to the right categories. And then when we're looking over the reports, they're raw data, but they're accurate.
Yeah,
But without someone, and the average person doesn't want to put the time in to enter data one by one.
right.
When they do 26 transactions a month on their credit card, it's not really like feasible, especially if you're doing one by one, to spend that time. And I would never, our business practice is very proactive. We put a team together for our clients. So they know their formation person, they know, which would be their registered agent afterward. They know their bookkeeper. I put them with personalities. So we have 4 different bookkeepers, even a team in India. and we diversify which type of client they, are best fit. If they're a client that are looking for a cost effective approach, I show them, here, this is a person that's just, they're going to get the data in correctly. Doesn't matter what career, what field they're in, it's the foundation's the same. Office expense, supplies, uh is it a commercial property we're looking at, or are we doing, home office here? And we it's the same structure. The only thing that's different with automated is it's unsupervised. So unless you know what you're doing, unless you're, like, have that background of understanding, which, for an entrepreneur, it's not going to be the first round. It's going to take 5 different years, and you only do taxes, it lasts a long time, but it's only one's going through if we do it right. So, the ones that learn from the headaches, like you said about IRS issues and stuff, they get and go to audit, they get a quick education, and it is the most costly approach.
Yeah.
But for the newly, recent, ones that are entering into sole proprietorship or as a DBA or going the corporation route, um, they need to have a structure in place where someone like, our mutual bookkeepers are taking the time to educate them on saying, like, hey, you're paying a lot for payroll. Let's talk to Michael about, getting you with another group that could be more cheaper. And we did that. We went from someone who went from 125 with one company to switching them over to them paying $25 a month in payroll expenses. So we can make a lot of changes when you have that interaction in place and that network in place where your bookkeeper and the tax preparer have that relationship. It's
I,
important.
you know what I love that I want to capture, and Lauren, if you can capture in a chat, I love this. I never heard it said this way. Automation, I'm going to change it a little bit. Automation needs supervision. I mean, that is the key. And Michael, I've been looking for the right words to say how I feel about QuickBooks, because I'm always saying you got to check every data. You got to check everything. It's great that it gives you the data already typed in. That's really what I'm saying is automation needs supervision. I just switched over from QuickBooks to Zero over the holidays.
Okay.
And oh
Zero.
my God, I thought about how much I was checking the trial balance, I was doing dual systems for a while, checking and checking. And it's only because I have the background I know to do that. And
Yeah.
most people, they just go ahead and they put the numbers in and they roll, and they don't realize that the balance sheet runs with it. And so you need to have that understanding, that supervision. I want to ask you a question about QuickBooks if I can. And this is something I'm curious about, and it might be only me that has an issue with it. It very well could be only me. I had the QuickBooks desktop version, but QuickBooks is trying to get away from that. They don't like you to use it at all anymore. And so when I switched over to the Mac, I didn't want to invest in the desktop. I have a problem with the QuickBooks Online. I have a problem with Intuit because I think a lot of times I don't like the way they handle their business practices. But one of the key issues is the fact that if you change the system, you lose the data because it's in their system. And if you have to go back and get a backup, they will only give 1 year. Zero will give 7 years, more in line with the IRS. Now that matters to me. And maybe I'm only splitting hairs because I'm old and I feel like you got to have the data backed up for 3 years, for the IRS 4 years, if you got payroll. How much of a concern is that, Michael? I've always wanted to ask another accountant that.
So I'm going to take one step back for our viewers to understand, the difference with QuickBooks and Zero. Intuit also, to make, disclaimer, they do own majority of the tax world. They have their hands in everything. Microsoft, it's all together. Which makes their pricing very high. And that's where it becomes very difficult as the rules are changing across the board with, how things are going. With In regards to which one is different, I always recommend Zero for my sole proprietors. The reason for that is QuickBooks allows journal entries. And to our viewers, what is a journal entry? It's when an accountant goes in and takes and moves around different expenses. Sometimes we're moving things from expense to owner distribution, which is on the balance report. But these are changes that journal entries are important for us because we have to make the reports fit the tax return. That's why your accountant part, not the tax preparer, the accountant part is the most important, because you're taking raw data and you're changing it up. With sole proprietors, it's Zero is a great opportunity. They're both very different companies, both for different opportunities that they offer. As I said, like Schedule C's, I love my Schedule C's going to Zero. It's great for them. The download simple, and with sole proprietors, there's no real journal entry because we're not using the balance sheet items. We're using only profit and loss items.
Gotcha.
But when we're transitioning, this is where it gets from a sole proprietor to a corporation. This is when it gets a little more iffy, because we have to really change a lot. We want to still utilize that data and carry it to the next year, but we also can't utilize the data with Zero because they don't allow journal entries. So that data needs to switch over to QuickBooks, because QuickBooks does corner the market. They do the journal entries. They are the bookkeepers, tools. There's everybody across the industry, would love to have a different options, not just, Zero go one way and QuickBooks go the other way. We would love to have more options,
I know.
so
I kept
when
thinking
retrieving data.
I kept thinking more companies will come into play. Now, one thing I learned with Zero, and I did a trial for a while because, me being CFO, I'm kind of an accounting snub, if you will, right? I want access to everything. So when I first did the thing, I was like, I can't do a journal entry. How am I going to do a journal entry, right? I was the same thing. It's like, no, I want to do a journal entry, right? So I got on the trial conversation and they were like, oh, wait a minute, Lori, if you go in and push this button, you have the accountant control on your data now. So when because at first when I looked at it, it was like you said, very simple, great for a sole prop. I was like, this software, because I was playing with both trying to see. But I was like, this does not work for me. And when I switched that button, it opened up all the magic things behind the scene. I could do journal entries. It was like QuickBooks. So far, like I said, I did a lot of, moving trial balances over and everything. And I don't have a statement on one over another, but so far I found the Zero interface to be really clean and easy to work with. One of the things Clarissa told me is that the Zero was more like an accountant would you be used to seeing, and that's complicated for some people. So I agree. When I first looked at it, I was like, no, it's not. But when you push that magic button in your own program, you get access to everything. They may have added that, but at least now I think there's two options. I think the thing to know and the thing to understand is whatever we use, we got to remember that that data is going to reports that are going to the IRS, and have a respect that it's got to be accurate. And so with that, I'm going to end with this question. What happens, Michael, when you get the letter from the IRS, other than freaking out, running down the road, screaming and putting your head in the sand as not an option? Just because, some people get letters from the IRS, they're not
Yes.
all bad. Some of them are
No.
just data requirements. Can we talk about if you're one of those people that get that letter from the IRS? I'm going to say choice number one, ignore it's not a good one. So why don't you give us some good choices on how to deal with a letter from the IRS?
You never want to ignore the IRS. You want to make sure like the IRS's letter is valid. It's not a scam or anything. Of course, there are different scams going on right now, especially that are. And I want to touch a bit based on that too, just because there are out there. Oh, I got this letter. Is it real or not? And it's important to not just like put it in your mail stack or your pile. Really put it at the top, read it over. What is the request form? Is it back to your taxes, or is it, hey, there was some money that was mistakenly not put in the correct tax year or installment plan or something that you have? You really want to keep these important letters in a separate file. If you're a manual, like print out, get something and put it in there, but don't like lose it. Make sure when they say deadlines, you want to call them and say, I like to go over this. if you had a situation where a family member was dealing with some health issues or stuff, those are things you want to have that interaction with the IRS, or the franchise tax board. Don't just ignore it. Be proactive. Take down their badge numbers, take down their name, take down the time. You spoke with them, and that's going to be your critical note right there, and that's the start of it. And then you're going to go and say to the person, I'm going to need to find a tax person.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
give yourself a little more time. Tell them your situation, give yourself a little more time. If it's something you can just where you don't need a tax person, I remember those stimulus checks were a big headache for a lot of us. Some of us, the tax preparers, was being told by the client, hey, I didn't get a stimulus check, and the client wouldn't go onto their bank account and go searching and be like, oh, I did get it, Michael. Well, by that time, it's too late. We've already filed you. And now you got to come up with $2,400 if you're married and repay it back. See, so those are simple IRS, letters that we confront. The more complex ones, that's where we need to talk strategy. If there's, installment plans, what can we do to talk? There's IRS, pros out there. We work with, many different, professionals, and depending on the level, of the IRS issue, sometimes you might want to go with more of an individual that is just, that's their focus is, IRS issue cases. And there's different tax preparers, there's different accountants, everyone's out there that's very different, but the structure is the same. If you're a business, you got to come up with that bookkeeping. If a franchise tax board sending a letter saying, we need more proof that you're a business, well, that's a little more sticky of a situation case. That means you're going to have, do you have your LA business license, at least that done? Do you have, documents like, are you commingling bank accounts? All these things are different case by cases. So, don't ignore those letters, because they can take your passports, they can garnish wages, they can make life fun, and they can make life, a little problematic, especially when we start getting to the liens.
Yep.
We don't, if we're at that point, then, it may be best, you want to find someone who focuses, on those tax resolutions. Because the average accountant and tax preparer, might not have the time to focus. So those other businesses, that's their core job. Every person has a core job. A bookkeeper's got a core job, a tax preparer's got a core job, and there are so many different other subs in that field for, like audits and all this. So making sure, the right specialties are, in place is important too.
Michael, I love you. As we're ending the show, we're out of time. We could go on forever, but I love what you just said about the bookkeeper's got a core job, the tax person's got a core job. There may be somebody that represents you to the IRS the best in their core job. Instead of calling everybody bookkeeper and tax preparer and, grouping them together, understanding that there's disciplines and understandings in each of these avenues. So before we end today, I want to make sure, Lauren, did you get Michael's information into the chat? I know you probably did. I don't see the chat because so much happens in that area, but make sure everybody's got a way to get in touch with Michael in case they want to reach out to you, find out if maybe they're a good candidate for you, you're a good candidate for them, or you have any advice of someone who is. And I really want to say how much I appreciate you coming on the show, Michael, because I wanted a tax preparer to come on and talk about just the way that it works, the processes, the interactions, the communication, the things to consider. Not just is this office deduction appropriate, but really get into the mechanisms of having a relationship with tax preparation. Because one of the reasons that I desired to get my EA certificate some time ago, I'm not even actively doing taxes right now, is I decided, I know if everything in the world just disappeared, but we were just a speck left, the IRS would want tax returns. So I saw it as long-term job security. No matter what, there is always going to
Yes.
be a request for a tax. There may not always be a request for a bookkeeper, maybe, but tax returns, Yes, there will always be a request for that. So my point of saying that is, guys, having to do tax returns is not going away anytime soon. In fact, it's getting more and more complicated, as you pointed out. So this is something we have to proactively address in our businesses. Get it right the first time. You don't want those scary things happening to you that we talked about at the end. So yes, I just saw Lauren, Michael, your information is in the chat for everybody to reach out. Any last words you would like to leave with our audience?
Um, yeah, absolutely. Phobias, tax phobia is a thing. And let me tell you, you're not alone. And even though it is something that we don't all want to be a part of, if you are interested to be an entrepreneur, we wear every hat and many hats. There is strengths and weaknesses in every part of what we do, but you got to put the time. You don't set it aside, don't ignore, take the initiative. I promise you the success is rising if you take it, by the horns, as they say.
I love that. Tax phobia is a real thing. I'm going to remember that one. I never heard it said so eloquently. Well, once again, Michael, thank you so much for being on the show. Shout out to Lauren for hanging in with us in the chat, even though you're not feeling well. Get some sleep, get better so we can see your lovely face next week. And a big thank you to, I can't believe the numbers we hit this morning for the first day into the new year as to people watching the show live. So I want to thank you, everybody that's came to the show, our frequent flyers that are back here with us, and those that are brand new. Thank you for watching Small Biz Talk with your host, Lori Williams, and I will see everybody next week. Bye, everybody. Bye, Michael.
Bye.